Hey everyone, it's me Lone. I hope you're doing all right. Heads up, I'm not feeling 100% in this video, but we need to talk about the news because Starfield has just received a classification rating in Australia of R18+. Now, me being Australian and living in the country, I was excited by this news. I wanted to talk about it just for that reason. But some of you might be asking, if you live outside of Australia, what does this matter to me? What do I care what happens in Australia? I don't live there. Plus, you're too strict when it comes to your video game laws anyways. That I agree with. However, this is actually relevant to anyone that is excited or interested in Starfield because this rating and this classification decision can actually tell us some top-line rough info in terms of what the content of Starfield is going to be like, especially when it comes to violence, language, nudity, and even drug use. And in particular, it's the drug use which is of note here because that is what took the game from being an MA15+ game like Fallout 4 and Skyrim to being an R18+ game like Doom Eternal, because Doom Eternal is also R18+ here. So I want to be explaining what all of this means, in addition to giving a bit of an explanation in terms of how this makes it a bit harder for Xbox and Bethesda to actually sell and advertise the game in this country, because being an R18+ game now, there are some additional restrictions when it comes to selling and advertising the game. So I want to be explaining all of that in this video. For those of you that don't know, this used to be my job. Before Bethesda, I used to deal with these classification laws heavily. I tried to get them reformed as well. It was part of what I did day to day. And now they're in a better state, but they're still not perfect. So I can give a bit of background and insight in terms of what all of this means. So if you enjoyed this video, all I ask is in the description and in the pinned comment, I've actually launched a brand new podcast. I've launched it with Rob Whittaker. He is a UFC middleweight. You might have heard of him. He and I have launched an MMA and video games podcast called Arcade Podcast. Really excited by this. Many of you know that I've been wanting to start up podcasting again for a very long time. I was going to do a solo one, but then Rob reached out and now we're doing a podcast together about MMA and video games. Really cool. If you want to check it out, the link to the first episode again is in the description and in the pinned comment. Please check it out, subscribe to the channel, support us there, and hopefully we build something really cool. So let's move on now. Let's talk about the news. What does it mean for a game to be classified as R18+ in Australia? Essentially, it means that the content in the game is high in impact. That's essentially what it means. I can give you the textbook definition in terms of what the classification board, the board that deals with all these classifications of games and films. I can tell you what the textbook definition of R18+ is, but generally that's what it means. This is what they say though. R18+ material is restricted to adults as it contains content that is considered high in impact for viewers. This includes content that may be offensive to sections of the adult community. A person may be asked for proof of their age before purchasing, hiring, or viewing R18+ films and computer games at a retail store or cinema. And that's the important point here. It's actually illegal in Australia to sell an R18+ game to a minor. Whereas when it comes to MA15+ games like Fallout 4 and Skyrim, you can still sell those games to someone that's a teenager under the age of 18, so long as you have an adult or guardian present. That is not allowed when it comes to an R18+ game like Starfield. So that's one of the reasons, and I'll explain why a little bit later. That's one of the reasons why it makes it a little bit harder for Starfield to be sold now in the country. And it might have an impact, very slightly, but it might have an impact on sales, but it might not, because games like Cyberpunk were also R18+, and that game sold like hotcakes. So that's what it means, but let's look into the actual decision for Starfield itself. Now, this is essentially what they give us. They give us this grid, and they go by the level of impact. As I said before, it's all about impact when it comes to classifying video games and films in Australia. So you've got no impact, very mild impact, moderate, strong, and high impact. So each of those effectively represent a classification rating. So let's say when it comes to mild impact, that means a game is likely to be classified PG. When it comes to moderate impact, it's M15. When it comes to strong impact, it's MA15+. And high impact, which is what Starfield was just rated as, is R18+. And you can see here it's classified against what they call 6 different classifiable elements. So themes, violence, language, drug use, nudity, and sex. All it takes is for any one of these classifiable elements to be considered as R18+, for a game to be pushed to that R18+ rating. So here, if it wasn't actually for the drug use, Starfield would have been rated as MA15+, just like Fallout 4 and just like Skyrim. But because of whatever kind of drug use it has in the game, it is now R18+. And again, we can compare this to what Fallout 4 was rated as, because they also have this grid as well, and it tells us what Fallout 4 was like. So we can kind of compare each element to see what Starfield might be like in terms of violence, and what Starfield might be like in terms of nudity and stuff like that. that. So let's go line by line and I'll give my brief opinions on it. So when it comes to themes essentially means anything that's not really violent or language or anything else. So it includes stuff like crime, like alcohol dependency, like death, serious illness, stuff like that. So it's kind of like a catch-all term when it comes to rating games, but it says that in terms of themes, Starfield is a moderate impact. This is the exact same as Fallout 4, mind you. So to be honest, this is nothing crazy. It's only M in the country. It can still be, if a game was rated as M with moderate themes, it could still be sold to teenagers and it's fine, right? So this is nothing to really write home about. When it comes to violence, however, it has strong impact. So this does mean that in terms of violence, it's going to somewhat match Fallout 4 in terms of its level of violence. Now, I know that there was a bit of a discussion in terms of whether Starfield's going to have as much blood and kind of gore, I guess, but whether more to the point, it's going to have as much blood as Fallout 4, because when you look at the trailers and the gameplay, there doesn't seem to be that much blood. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to be bloody and gory just as Fallout 4, but I think the reason why it was strong impact is because you have guns and you're shooting enemies. Like, that's the big reason why a game is going to be taken to MA15 plus strong impact. But at the very least, very top line, you can say that roughly Fallout 4 and Starfield have very similar levels of violence, but it doesn't necessarily say that Starfield is bloody, is what I'm trying to say. So if you like your violence, Starfield's going to satisfy you. I don't think we have to worry about that at all. When it comes to rating, again, rating is a moderate impact, the exact same as Fallout 4. So you're going to have some swearing in there. Think of the dialogue in Fallout 4. It's probably going to be very same when it comes to that. But then it comes to drug use. Now, drug use is classified R18+. For comparison, drug use in Fallout 4 was moderate impact at blue. So even with all the kind of the medics and everything in Fallout 4, that still wasn't classified as high impact. But Starfield has. Now, the classification board in Australia has always had a thing when it comes to drug use in-game, right? It's been a long point of contention. In fact, back in the day, Fallout 3 was banned classification. It was refused classification because it had too high of a drug use. Specifically, it had drug use in the game that was incentivized and linked to rewards. If you remember, MedX was actually called morphine in the game, and because of that real-world drug reference, they said that Fallout 4 was refused classification. It wasn't allowed to be sold in the country initially until they changed the name to MedX from morphine, and now it could be sold, right? So this might be something similar. Starfield might have, like meds in the game or something that have a real world equivalent. And that might be been one of the reasons anyways why I took it overboard. Another reason why, there might have been an animation in the game which kind of showed drug use. And that's another reason the board will look at and be like, that seems to be high impact. We don't want teenagers and kids seeing that kind of stuff. So that's potentially another reason why it could be R18+. I'm not talking any inside info here. Let me be very, very clear. I've only seen exactly what you've seen publicly. I'm just saying in terms of like what this means, those are roughly the reasons why a game could be receiving high impact when it comes to drug use. My guess, it's a combination of everything. It's probably a particular med or a drug in the game which you can see yourself inserting or maybe inhaling that gives you a little bit of a boost in the game. Kind of like, again, MedX does, whatever drug in Fallout 4 does. Similar, but not quite the same. Clearly, something has ticked off the board to get it to high impact. So that's what it means. So let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Starfield is R18 specifically because of that decision. But let's cover the rest of them. So when it comes to nudity is green, so very mild impact. That's like a G rating equivalent in Australia. Fallout 4, for comparison, had no nudity. So it seems like Starfield has a little bit of nudity, but nothing crazy, because as you can see in the next line, sex, there is literally no impact of sex. So there's nothing sexual in Starfield, whereas with Fallout 4 had moderate impact when it came to sex because you could romance your character. Does this mean we can't romance characters in Starfield, or is it kept very behind closed doors? It does say no impact at all. So this makes me think that there's not even a reference that you can have sex with your companions or any other NPCs. If there was a level of that, like with Fallout 4, then I'd expect to see like mild or moderate impact. But because it's literally none, and because nudity is very mild impact, then what I think is that there's literally probably no romancing in Starfield, maybe? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, but maybe the nudity is like, when we're in the character creation and we can see kind of like our character's body a little bit more so. Maybe. I don't know. But that's essentially what it means, and I compared that to Fallout 4 to give you a bit of an idea in terms of what the content of Starfield might be like. But what does this mean in terms of selling the game in Australia? As said, it makes it a little bit harder now for Xbox and Bethesda to sell the game and advertise the game in the country. And I can almost be certain that they would have preferred the game to be MA15+. The reason why I say that is because there are less restrictions when it comes to advertising, and importantly, they could have technically sold the game to teenagers that had an adult present with them, because it's not illegal to sell a game to a teenager or to a child or a minor if they have their adult or parent or guardian present and they say it's okay. That's totally okay. But with an R18 plus game, that's not even allowed. You have to be an adult, and potentially you might have to bring out your ID to be buying the game and for a retailer to sell the game in Australia. But it's not just that, it's also in terms of advertising. So let me give you another example. In Australia, if you have a game that's R18+, you can still advertise it in the cinema, and cinema advertising here is huge. Different games like to use cinema advertising to promote their game. It's a thing here. When your game is classified as R18+, it means you cannot show a trailer or an advertisement of your game in a film or at a cinema that is showing a film that is below R18+. So you can only show it at a film screening, which is also R18+, which is like Deadpool, for instance, right? Only films like that. If a film is MA15+, it is not allowed. But if your game was MA15+, it could be shown at films that were MA15+ or R18+. So it gives it a little bit more flexibility in that regard. So that's just one thing. Another thing is displaying or showing your game off at events. If Bethesda or Xbox wanted to show off their game or Starfield at an event or at a shopping mall or whatever it might be, some sort of display, it is now restricted. Everyone that plays the game, again, you have to make sure that they're an adult. Plus, there are rules around, like you have to actually make sure everything is covered so no child or no one else looking in can see the content, because the content and the gameplay is now technically R18+. So it just makes that a little bit harder as well. Plus as well, there are still some retailers in Australia which are a little bit funny when it comes to selling R18 games. There have been some retailers in the past which have actually pulled R18+ games from the shelves because they found the content to be objectionable. And in the past, like Target, you have Target in the US, Target here in Australia were putting plain classification labels on games, so they weren't showing the actual box art of R18 games. There was just like a black and white thing. And that might happen for Starfield if they still have that rule. I haven't checked in a while. But certain retailers can not play nice when it comes to R18+ games either. Now, it's not impossible. I'm just saying it makes it a little bit harder for them to sell their game. They can still have, R18+ games on a billboard or on buses, things like that. Like Doom Eternal was on buses and billboards everywhere when we were selling that game, so that was fine. But it's in certain areas like this where it might make it a little bit harder. So I reckon Bethesda and Xbox probably wanted to get that MA15+ rating, especially because there's obviously so many, especially between the ages of 15 and 18. It's a huge demographic. They play games all the time. And now it's going to be harder for Starfield to get into their hands. Now, I will say, a lot of you might be saying, I can just get the game on Game Pass or download it on Steam. Yes, you could. I'm talking about physical retail here. Physical retail in Australia is still pretty big. It's not gone away completely like it has in other countries, especially because of our slow internet and all stuff like that. It's still a decent chunk here, right? It's still important for Bethesda and Xbox, even though the game is going to be on Game Pass as well. But yes, if you do have an Xbox and you have an account which you've made up yourself and you've said you're 18 plus or whatever it might be, yeah, you'd be able to buy Starfield, no question. If you have your own Steam account, yeah, you'd be able to buy Starfield, no question. It comes into it when maybe your parents have set up your Xbox for you, or your parents, just don't like R18 plus games in your household and you are a teenager. Then yeah, you wouldn't be able to buy the game because your console and your account is restricted to games that are below the age of 18. So very, very small, easy workarounds, but mostly it's for when it comes to physical retail. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below about what you think of Starfield's R18 plus rating. I hope this video has been helpful for you. It's been enjoyable for me to make it and kind of think about all these rules and laws again. But until next time, this has been Lone. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.